Mangwanani Mwalelepo Vugenjani Vanave Africa. Welcome to our show where we keep you abreast with the latest happenings across the continent. This is your favorite current affairs breakfast show. It is called Africa Good Morning. I am your host, Ainara Izakoyo, alongside Diana Master. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic. How are you? It's a wholesome Wednesday.
It's a wholesome Wednesday.
What are we doing?
Just preparing for the Tourism Expo.
Love that.
Love that. We're
Yeah.
looking forward to it. It's exactly 1 week because it starts next week, Wednesday. So yes, we are looking forward to that. But before we get to the Tourism Expo, let's actually cover what we're going to talk about in today's broadcast. Sudan's warring generals agree to a 24-hour ceasefire after U.S. pressure. Tanzania to overtake Kenya as East Africa's largest economy in 10 years. Putin visits occupied Kherson region in Ukraine. We're also going to be speaking to Ari Hochard, who is in Cape Town, South Africa, and he will be updating us on the latest news in South Africa. Stick around, we'll be back with our top stories right after this break.
To another exciting episode of Oneuptwo.
Is weer en vertel ook vir julle waar die vis julle moontlik kan byt.
In our top stories this morning, Sudan's warring general agrees 24-hour ceasefire after U.S. pressure. Sudan's rival commander agreed a 24-hour ceasefire from Tuesday evening, the army said, following calls to each side from U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken over fierce fighting in Khartoum that saw shots fired at a U.S. diplomat convoy. The ceasefire will start at 6 p.m. and will not extend beyond the agreed 24 hours. Army General Sham al-Din, a member of Sudan's ruling military council, said on Al Arabiya TV. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken held separate calls with the army chief and the head of the paramilitary rapid support forces, whose power struggle has killed at least 185 people across the country and derailed an internationally backed plan to shift to civilian rule for decades of autocracy and military control. RSF leader General Mohamed Dagalo, known as Hemditi, whose whereabouts have not been disclosed since fighting began, said RSF approved the 24-hour ceasefire to ensure the safe passage of civilians and the evacuation of the wounded.
Getting into our next story, Putin visits occupied Kherson region in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited occupied parts of the Ukrainian region of Kherson. He attended a military meeting to hear reports from commanders. According to the Kremlin, Mr. Putin is also thought to have visited the Luhansk region. Russia annexed Kherson and Luhansk last year. Such trips by the Russian leader are rare, although he made a surprise visit to the city of Mariupol in March. Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, tweeted that Mr. Putin was touring the occupied and ruined territories of Ukraine to enjoy the crimes of his minions for the last time. Putin's degradation is impressive, he said. Mr. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that the visit had taken place on 17 April. However, footage initially posted on the Kremlin's website contradicts the statement. In the clip, Mr. Putin can be clearly heard saying that the Easter holiday is quote-unquote coming up. Orthodox Easter was celebrated in Russia on the 16th of April, the day before the date claimed by Mr. Peskov. The video on the Kremlin website has since been edited, with Mr. Putin's words "coming up" removed. The president is also said to have inquired about the situation in the Zaporizhzhia region, which Moscow has also claimed as part of Russia. He is quoted as telling the military meeting in person that while he did not want to distract them from their duties, it is important for him to hear their opinion on how the situation is developing.
In our next story, Tanzania to overtake Kenya as East Africa's largest economy in 10 years. The race for economic supremacy in the East African region is set to take a more competitive twist as projections point to Tanzania overtaking Kenya in the next 10 years. According to the International Monetary Fund, Tanzania's economy, which now stands at $85.4 billion, is set to grow into a $136 billion economy by 2028. In contrast, Kenya's economy, which is the largest in East Africa at $118.1 billion, will be a $151 billion economy by 2028. However, based on the economic outlook provided by IMF and banking on the GDP growth trends of the two countries, Tanzania will outpace Kenya's economic growth and will have the larger economy in the next 10 years.
Moving over, Uganda charges second minister in a major corruption scandal. Ugandan prosecutors on Monday charged a second government minister with corruption-related offences in a scandal stemming from the diversion of roofing sheets that should have been distributed to vulnerable people. Amos Lugolobi, the state minister for finance in charge of planning, pleaded not guilty to the charges when he was arraigned in a courtroom in the capital, Kampala. Another minister, Mary Goreti Kitutu, was similarly charged last week. At least 22 top officials are implicated in the scandal, including the Vice President, the Parliamentary Speaker, the Prime Minister and government ministers. More officials are likely to be charged later this week. President Yoweri Museveni, whose government is often accused of lacking the political will to stem corruption, has ordered detectives to investigate the case and indict those deemed responsible for diverting thousands of metallic roofing sheets that had been appropriated for people in the remote region of Karamoja. The scandal came to light in February after the local New Vision newspaper reported that security officials in eastern Uganda had intercepted government-branded iron sheets being sold by relatives of Kitutu, the minister in charge of Karamoja. According to the New Vision's subsequent reporting, thousands of iron sheets have been systematically shared among a range of government officials since June. In the case of Lugolobi, the newspaper published a photo of what it said was the minister's goat shed roofed with government property.
Tunisia police arrest 3 prominent officials of Ennahda party. Tunisia police arrested 3 prominent officials of the main opposition Ennahda party on Tuesday, hours after they detained party leader Rachid Ghannouchi, the most prominent critic of President Kais Saied, a lawyer and official said. Lawyer Monia Bauli told Reuters that the officials arrested are Mohamed Gaumani, Belsen Hassan and Mohamed Chainba. Now, officials in Ennahda confirmed the arrest. Police raided Ennahda party headquarters early on Tuesday and evacuated all present to start a search that will take days after showing a judicial warrant, party officials said. The police have this year detained leading political figures who accuse Saied of what they call a coup after closing the elected parliament in 2021 and his move to rule by decree before writing the constitution. The earlier arrests have led to charges of conspiring against state security, have drawn a statement of concerns from the US and rights group. Now, an Interior Ministry official said Ghannouchi had been brought in for questioning and his house search on the order of the public prosecutor investigating inciting statements.
And now bringing us to the end of our top stories, G7 ministers pledge to intensify Russian sanctions and slam China. The foreign ministers of G7 have pledged to intensify sanctions against Russia over its war in Ukraine and criticized China for its actions in the Taiwan Strait and disputed South China Sea, urging Beijing to act as a responsible member of the international community. The comments issued on Tuesday marked the conclusion of a 3-day meeting in the Japanese resort town of Karuizawa. The G7 communique also criticized North Korea over its nuclear and ballistic missile program, expressed concern over the violence in Sudan and Myanmar, and called on the Taliban to reverse its ban on women working for non-governmental organizations and the United Nations. The document was prepared as a template for global leaders to use at a G7 summit that will be held in Hiroshima, Japan next month, and also included language about Iran, nuclear proliferation, and other grave threats. Two crises stood out: Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's increasing assertiveness against and military maneuvers around Taiwan, the self-governing democracy that Beijing claims as its own.
Now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has invited Russian President Vladimir Putin to the BRICS summit to take place later this year in South Africa. When we return, Ari Hohat brings us this story and more.
Welcome to Active Kids, a daily TV show that sparks creativity, learning, and fun for young minds. With exciting activities and lessons, Active Kids inspires curiosity and a love for learning.
New face to the 115.
The perfect mix of play and education. Don't miss out on the fun. Tune into Active Kids on NTV every weekday at 10 o'clock and let the adventure begin.
Now we cross on over to South Africa to speak to Ari Hohat, who's going to give us an update on all the latest stories that side. Good morning, Ari.
Yeah, very good morning, Diana. Nice to talk to you, and hello, Anna. Morning.
It's always nice to talk to you on a Wednesday morning. Let's get into your first story. President Cyril Ramaphosa did formally invite alleged war criminal Russian President Vladimir Putin to the BRICS summit later this year in South Africa, but Cabinet is considering the ramification.
Yes, indeed. It's the BRICS conference going to take place later this year in August in Johannesburg. But I think it's a slippery slope for South Africa. They've publicly said that they're neutral to all that's happening in Ukraine, etc. But the relationships with Russia are obviously strong from the government side. The problem for South Africa here is that the International Criminal Court, there's a warrant of arrest out for President Putin because of crimes committed during the Ukraine invasion. And South Africa is a signatory member of the International Criminal Court, and so they're obliged to arrest a person on arrival in South Africa if there's a warrant out. So that is difficult for South Africa. So actually, because of that, obliged to arrest President Putin, which I doubt will happen. So the government, South African government, has requested a legal opinion on this. So we'll see what will happen in future. But it is 22 to 24 August in Johannesburg. It's BRICS makeup of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South African presidents or leaders that come together. So we'll see what the government stance on that will be. But it can be a slippery slope for South Africa if they do have President Putin in South Africa.
All right, now we move over to our next story. The National Treasury of South Africa is saying that they are able to borrow Eskom money in the next 3 years. Tell us about this.
Yes, the Treasury, that is the Bank of South Africa. They're handling all the money and what goes out. But they also, in a way, maybe the word is had enough of all the money going into Eskom without they're having a good plan to get money from their customers. So that is the big problem. That is the Minister of Energy, Minister Makopa. He asked for more money in the next 3 years. There's already 254 billion South African rand being given over the next 3 years to Eskom. That's to service the debt. The debt is massive. It's a big number, 420 billion South African rand is the debt. So Eskom obviously is struggling to service that debt. So it was a Treasury that said from the 1st of April, the fine to expect the money with tariffs raised for customers and get the money in. So the problem there is that municipalities also owe the Eskom 52 billion. So the process from municipalities to get in the money, the Eskom, the electricity money, is not good at the moment. So they need to step that up. But the Treasury said that they had enough. They must get more money in from the customers.
Now moving on, Ari, the former CEO of scandal-hit retail giant Steinhoff did not appear in court in Germany yesterday, and German prosecutors have applied for an arrest warrant. Could you please give us the details?
I think Germany will handle all these cases a bit different than South Africa. We know that Germany is known to be more strict and they're going to be more direct. At least there's a case that's on the table. South African authorities have not even put a case towards Mr. Jooste. It goes back for the Steinhoff scandal quite a few years ago that got with accounting fraud and overstating values. So what the Germans did was they said with the interest of Steinhoff in Europe, there's 5 counts of fraud and they said there's a term of 2 years that the value of assets, the fixed assets, were overstated by 800 billion euros. And that's Steinhoff that did that. And then the assets and the profits were overstated by 105 billion. So that's what Germany is claiming. But in brief, Mr. Jooste didn't pitch in Germany. He now claims that he had passport problems and he couldn't find his passport, and the authorities there was a misunderstanding with authorities, etc. So he's playing a waiting game. But the Germans, they're not going to take this. They said that they want him, then arrest warrant for him to be taken to Germany to be before the court.
All right, now the South African Airways still looks set to finalize a 51% stake in Tanzania Consortium as a strategic equity partner. Tell us about this.
I think it's important, South African Airways being the flagship of South African travel, air flight travel for the past 20, 30 years. So they've been troubled almost like Eskom, and it's been because of massive amounts of debt. So the Tanzania Consortium buying in 51%, that is Gidon Novic. He actually resigned from the board to avoid a conflict of interest. He's also the CEO of Lyft, a new company that started in South Africa, and he's part of the Tanzania Consortium. So they claimed there was a breach of interest, but the Minister, Pravin Gordhan there, he said that maybe in 4 months' time, hopefully in 4 months' time, the 51% stake will be done, by which Tanzania will pay 3 billion South African rand to get the 51% stake, and hopefully they can get South African Airways again up in the air. So they have a massive debt of 3.5 billion. South African Airways, the government took over 1 billion, but Tanzania said that they will not take the legacy debt of the balance of 2.5 billion. So they're fighting still about who's going to pay the debt in South African Airways, but hopefully that will be done in 4 months' time. And SAA will again be the flagship flying people from South Africa all over the world.
And now we are going to be waiting for an update to see who was actually going to pay the debt. Thank you so much, Ari, for bringing us the latest news on the ground at that side.
Yes, it's a big pleasure and a brilliant day for everyone today. Bye-bye.
Now let's take a look at the weather predictions before we return with our economic news.
All right, let's get into our economic news for this morning. Zambia struggled with cost of living as debt reworks drags on. Now, the COMESA market in Zambia's capital, Lusaka, appears to be bustling, but traders says business is suffering as a weak local currency pushes up prices, adding to the hardships of a population already struggling with soaring living costs. The dollar is killing us, said Ben Mandela, who sold a 50 15 imported blankets a month last year for 50 kwacha profit per sale, but is now selling only 2 or 3. A weak kwacha has stopped inflation falling in recent months, which officials and economists blame in part on Zambia's struggle to complete a debt restructuring since it defaulted on its debt in 2020, as well as on disappointing copper output. Now, bondholders who had invested in our local markets and whose bonds or whose investments are maturing are getting the money out and are not reinvesting, says Natalie Mwila of the Center for Trade Policy and Development, a Zambia think tank. It's putting pressure on our local currency, which obviously also has raised the cost of living.
Now swinging on back home, B2 Gold begins a phased closure of Namibia's Oshikoto mine. Canadian gold miner B2 Gold Corp has started the phased closure of its Oshikoto open pit mine in Namibia because of its depleted gold resource, the company said on Tuesday. The mine, which began commercial production in March 2015, produced 161,614 ounces of gold in 2022, contributing nearly 16% of B2 Gold's total output last year. The Canadian miner also has operations in Mali and the Philippines, as well as exploration projects in Uzbekistan, Finland, and Colombia.
Let's have a look at our economic indicators.
Good day everyone, time for international sports news, and starting off with English Premier League soccer first, and it's a game that was played at Leeds United, and it was Liverpool that visited Leeds United. Liverpool way too strong for Leeds. They beat them by 6-1. Good result for Liverpool, trying to stay in the top 8 at least to try and qualify for Europa League. It seems like they're not going to be able to make a top 4 for UEFA Champions League next season. At the moment, Liverpool in 8th position on 47 points, and it is Newcastle in 4th position on 56 points, so quite a few points ahead of them. Leeds United struggling to avoid relegation at the moment. They're in 16th position, right on the relegation cut, and they have 29 points after 31 games. Next game for Leeds will be at Fulham. They go away to play at Fulham. That will be on Friday evening. And Liverpool, they at home over the weekend on Saturday. They will play against Nottingham Forest. Continuing with cricket news, the Indian Premier League that continues. There's lots of games still to be played. The final will only be on the 21st of May. That's the India Premier League. Latest game, Chennai Super Kings, they had a win of 8 runs over the Royal Challengers Bangalore. Chennai Super Kings batted first, and it was 226 for 6 that they scored, and it was Conway with 83 runs that at the best runs for the Chennai Super Kings. They beat the Royal Challengers Bangalore because they only reached 218 for 8, and it was South African Faf du Plessis, the best batsman for the Royal Challengers Bangalore. He scored 66 runs off just 33 deliveries. It's Rajasthan Royals that's leading at the moment with 8 league points after 5 games, and with the win, the Chennai Super Kings now move into 3rd position with 6 league points after 5 games. Also, international test one-day series that's been played New Zealand, that is playing in Pakistan. It's the 3rd T20 game. They're playing 5 T20 games. Pakistan won the first 2, but it's New Zealand that came back in the 3rd one now. They won by 4 runs. It was firstly New Zealand that batted first, 163 for the loss of 5 wickets, with Tom Latham scoring 64 or 49 deliveries, and then it was Pakistan bowled out on the last ball of their 20 overs, 159 all out. Two more games in the series of the T20s to be played. That will be on Thursday. That will be game 4, and then game 5 will be on Monday. After that, they'll also play 5 50-over ODIs. Continuing international sports news with tennis news is from the Barcelona Open. Rounds of 64 games that was played. It is Nuno Borges of Portugal. He's through to the round of 32. He beat Ivaska of Russia by 6-2 and 6-3. Then also Ben Shelton. He played against countryman from the USA, Michael McDonald. He beat him by 7-5 and 6-4. Next up will be a difficult game for Nuno Borges. He needs to play now against the number 1 seed, Carlos Alcaraz of Spain. That is in the round of 32. And then Ben Shelton, he will come up against the number 3 in the world, or the 3rd seed rather, that is Casper Ruud. Also number 2 seed, Stefanos Tsitsipas, they will also be in action in the round of 32. Some of the big names of world tennis not playing in this tournament. Andrei Rublev, that won the Monte Carlo Open just a week ago, or the Masters, he's not playing in the tournament, and also Novak Djokovic not in action in this tournament. Currently it is Novak Djokovic that's the world number 1. He's got the world number 1 ranking, and it is Carlos Alcaraz that can overtake him again if he wins the Barcelona Open. That's international sports news for today. Hope you have a great sport day, and we talk again tomorrow. Goodbye.
That brings us to the end of our broadcast, but before we say goodbye, let's take a look at the highlights from earlier on. Sudan's warring generals agree to a 24-hour ceasefire after US pressure. Putin visits occupied Kherson region in Ukraine. Tanzania to overtake Kenya as East Africa's largest economy in 10 years. Zambians struggle with cost of living as debt rework drags on.
Those have been our stories. We thank you very much for watching our show this morning. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. On that note, it's all our love, all our light, and happy Wednesday.